Hello and welcome to Talking Africa. My name is Oheneba Ama Intiose and I have a special edition for you today. We are trailing the Africa Reports podcast series on women who lead, profiling high-achieving female business executives, politicians, and thinkers in Africa and in the diaspora. In each episode, we sit down with outstanding women and dive underneath the surface to bring you the most captivating personal stories from their journeys to the top, while drawing from their experience to empower the next generation of women leaders. My guest today is a top South African business person and a women's rights activist. She's the executive chairperson of Kalagadi Manganese and one of a handful of women shaking up South Africa's mining industry. A warm welcome to you, Ms. Daphne Mashile-Nkosi.
Thank you.
We'd like to get to know you as a person, who you are, where did you grow up, where is home for you, and some family background, just so that people can know you a bit more.
Okay. As you say, my name is Daphne Mashile-Nkosi. I was born in a town in the eastern Transvaal or eastern part of South Africa, in a town called Pilgrim's Rest, where gold was discovered in 1860. So mining has always been in my blood. I was born into mining. I was born there, but my family moved, my parents moved into Johannesburg because Johannesburg was the city of gold, where if you wanted opportunities, you'd move to the urban centers so that you can actually work for your children. So I was born in the eastern part of South Africa. As a young child, I used to walk 8 miles to school without shoes.
Wow.
And I think everything that you see about me, I was shaped by that environment. My grandfather was working in the mines. My father we had a standard 6. My mother never went to school, but she was a seamstress because with children, 4 children to feed, 4 children to look after, as a mommy, you have to learn to do other things. So for your little girls and your little boys. So they never went to school. So I was not born of a teacher or a nurse. I was born of just ordinary people.
But look where you are today. I think there's nothing ordinary about your journey so far. So tell us a bit about the young Daphne. What was she like?
I think the young Daphne, as I say, I was shaped by the environment. I saw poverty every day in my face. I have slept without food simply because there was no food for everyone. And simply because of that, somewhere in my subconscious, as I was growing up, I decided that my children will never go through that. So the young Daphne, I remember in standard 1, I actually wrote. My teacher used to remind me that when I was asked, what do you want to become? I said, I wanted, to be successful. I wanted to build a big house. I wanted to get married. I wanted freedom because South Africa of the time was very, very difficult. There was no freedom. So those were the 4 things that I wanted in life. And actually, it is those things that as I was growing up, I wanted to achieve each and every one of them. For instance, freedom. I fought for freedom. I was class of 76 at the Soweto uprisings. I was part of the Soweto Student Representative Council. So I wanted freedom. In terms of building a big house, I wanted to be economically independent so that I can have the things that I have. I wanted to deal with issues of poverty simply because I've seen poverty, I've experienced poverty, and I never wanted my children to go through that. Happiness, of course, you wanted to get married, as any young girl would want to do, but I was always an outlier, always a go-getter, always want to do good, always wanted to be the best of the best.
Very driven then as a very young girl, and I know that laid the foundation for all that you achieved afterwards. You mentioned your political activism. Can you talk to us a bit about that and how that led you into the mining industry?
I think when I was in matric, there was the Soweto uprisings in 1976. I was in the executive who organized the marches and everything. And of course, you end up in prison. I was in prison.
Wow.
As a student.
For how long?
In and out, 3 months, come back, 6 months, come back, 9 months, come back. And for me, it was a story of my young life. I met my husband, who spent 12 years in prison because we're all activists. And my son was actually 12 when he met his father for the first time. And it's all those things that, actually shaped me who I was, because I was a go-getter, but also the survival strategies that I had in business were actually shaped by the fact that I had to survive during those days. As a student activist, I wanted education to be equal. I wanted equality before the law. I wanted everything that everyone could achieve in South Africa. And therefore, it actually shaped me to become a woman activist. So I'm a woman activist because as a student I was an activist, and therefore what did I do as a woman activist? I became, fought for the minority of African women under customary law, or what in South Africa we used to call the minority status of African women under customary law. And I actually influenced policy with the new government in 1994 to actually have the equality law, which actually looked at both the traditional marriages that were impacting negatively on women, to say, what is it that can be done? It was about the choices that we make as women. If you want to be in a polygamous marriage, so be it, because we have the right to do so. But you must be protected in terms of how you bring up your children, how you accumulate wealth, because if you don't have wealth, if you don't have land, even in South Africa, even in Africa, it is so that if you don't have land, you don't have collateral, and therefore you can not get funding to actually improve yourself. So it's all those things that actually shaped me as a young woman activist. I was part of the pre-Beijing process in Dakar in 1985 and the post-Beijing process. So I've always been in the empowerment of women in all my life until I became a mother, I became a grandmother. So I'm still on that journey up until today. I'm in business. I advocate for the inclusion of women in businesses.
Wonderful. Well, before we go a bit into your industry, since you brought up your women activism, I think we want to go into some gender questions. Like, you are in a very male-dominated field. I think that's obvious in the mining industry. And some top female leaders have said it can get very lonely at the top, where you really feel you can't, sometimes you just want a woman to talk to because they understand how you feel. Sometimes you look around and there's no one. How have you dealt with this? Are you pulling other women up so that it's less lonely at the top?
Pulling other women is one. You're pulling them up so that you can mentor them, so that you can talk to them, so that you can, share the challenges, share your frustrations, share your failures, because we never actually share our failures. I've done that, but it actually is very lonely. As I said and indicated, that I was always an outlier. At home, I was the only one who was asking questions. So being lonely for me actually was a driver to say, you know what, there's nothing wrong in me being the only one. There's nothing, the odd one out, for as long as I believe in my vision and focus on actually changing society by actually having a different point of view. That was my approach. The loneliness, I can tell you, so many times I wanted to throw in the towel. But I look back and I said, I've always wanted, being part of the Beijing process, was that we will work, for the empowerment of women. And I actually said, if I fail, young women will fail. If I fail, young women will fail in Africa. If I fail, young women will fail elsewhere outside of Africa, in the whole global, we are now part of the global village, and therefore everybody will know that I've failed, and therefore I would have failed the whole world. And I didn't want to do that. So many times I've thrown in the towel. And to wake up the next morning and say, I cannot do it. And let me push myself. And there were women who might not have been in the industry, but who actually saw my pain, who actually saw my efforts, those that you employ, those that know about you, those that see you as a role model. So those are the people that I stood in their shoulders to actually share some of the frustrations. And sometimes as women, we are harsh on ourselves because we never want to fail.
I wanted to talk to you about
because
that.
failure is something that people see in women only. And for me, I was saying, yes, if I failed, it's fine. I'll stand up, I'll learn from it. And let me tell you, you fail, you look back, you say, I would have done it differently. And you dust yourself and you stand up and you do it much better. So
it's something I wanted to talk to you about, the pressure we put on ourselves as women, because we have this standard of perfection we want to hit, and men don't put that pressure on themselves. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel as women we really expect, the expectations we have of ourselves sometimes is to a point where it's overwhelming and you don't even end up doing what you have to do.
I think I'm of the view that women don't have choices because we are expected to bring up children. You are expected to bring up these designer kids. You want them to succeed. You want your boys, you want your boys to succeed. You want your girls to succeed.
Yeah.
You want them to get married. You might want them to be successful. So everything that you do, you want to cook for your husband. You want to be the best cook. You want to be the best wife. You want to be the best of everything. And therefore, that's the pressure that, unfortunately, as women, we have to push ourselves. But also, if we are to compete with males, you have to do it 10 times more for people to actually recognize that you can. For instance, when I started companies, I started the first coal company. People don't actually know that I was a founder of the 4th largest coal company in South Africa, simply because they never saw me because I was an odd woman, in a group of men. They actually saw the men who started the company and not you. And therefore, I had to put as much more effort in manganese for people to recognize that I exist as a female and I can do it on my own.
Wow. Since you brought up manganese, I want us to go back to the industry. So manganese represents South Africa has 80% of the world reserves, which is really significant. And you've said in the past that the commodity, you believe it should be declared a strategic mineral resource in South Africa because of its importance to steel making, for example. Do you think this has been taken up seriously?
I think it's not only in South Africa. If you look at South Africa representing 80% of world reserves and Gabon and the West African countries, actually there's a pipe, of iron ore and manganese in West Africa that is coming down. It therefore means that between, the African continent, we actually have 90% of world reserves of manganese, without manganese, you will not have steel. Which without steel, you will not have infrastructure development. You will not have the ports. You will not have the highways. We will not have the buildings. We will not have the ICCs that we are in an international conference center today. You would not have that without steel. And therefore, without manganese, all the raw materials are in Africa for steel making. And therefore, we need to beneficiate that and add value so that we create the jobs in Africa and never import them as raw materials to buy them back as finished products. Because as we do that, we actually export the jobs and our people become more unemployed, and you create opportunities for other countries like China to actually import steel at very high prices, creating jobs for themselves. There's no country, there's no continent that will act in the best interest of another. For Africans, we need to ensure that we create jobs for our people and not export jobs. Because there's no one who will sit and say, you know what, Africa must actually develop.
Yeah.
It is us as Africans that will make Africa great.
And with this jobs being exported, I believe that has to do with the smelters, for example, being set up in Malaysia. That is taking away jobs from the local people in South Africa.
Of course, it's easy. And no one said it's easy. Everything is difficult. If electricity pricing in Africa and South Africa in particular is expensive, it does not necessarily mean that you can't have constructive engagement to try and come up with a solution. It becomes a business imperative to plan for it rather than export the jobs. It's an easier way of actually looking at it and saying, I'll go to Malaysia because they have hydro, energy, and therefore they will give me a cheaper electricity. You don't look at the best interest of your own country, because yes, you have the smelters in Malaysia, but at the end of the day, your company is in South Africa. Your company is in Africa. For as long as Africa